Hello everyone and welcome to this video as we look further at Donald Trump's onslaught against liberal elite universities and the Trump MAGA insistence that there be merit in admissions. And the big question we will be asking in this video, what do they really mean by merit? Here goes Donald Trump through an executive order continuing his onslaught against woke liberal universities. This time, and quoting the Supreme Court decision against race-conscious admissions, Trump wants data on those admissions by race. And he's forcing the colleges to prove that they do not consider race in their admissions process. Welcome to Pillar on Politics, and I'm Bob Pillar. This is the channel where I will always maintain that the way to understand the lunacy of American politics today is to recognize and realize and follow through on the implications that the Trump MAGA Republican Party is at its core, in its essence, a white Christian nationalist, white supremacist party. And yes, the two go together. And the key to understanding this lunacy in American politics is that every phenomenon about Trump and the MAGA party that is a mystery, that is an inexplicable phenomenon to the Democrats, can be revealed and understood by applying a white Christian nationalist, white supremacist lens. I have done a previous video on the Trump MAGA takedown of Harvard. It's on the Pillar on Politics channel if you'd like to view it. In that video, I talk about the Trump MAGA takedown of Harvard. And as I said, in this video, we're going to focus more on what does Trump and MAGA mean by merit. Doing the analysis of Harvard's incoming freshman class of 2024 was quite startling and definitely illuminating. As we can see here, these are statistics provided by Harvard on their website. The black enrollment as well as Latino enrollment are not far or quite in line with the national demographic breakdown. For example, blacks are 14% of the Harvard enrollment for that freshman class, and nationwide they are 13.7%, and the Hispanic Latino numbers are also quite in line, so don't really see much of an issue there. What really stood out, what was really quite astounding, is the Asian American representation in Harvard's enrollment. Nationally, Asian Americans comprise 6.4% of the American population, but of the freshman class of 2024, they were 37%, a six-fold increase in representation. That was very surprising. White Americans, that is, those Americans of European descent, now comprise, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 58.4% of Americans. And given, if we add up all of those minorities listed there, that they add up to 68%, that means that at most, white students comprise 32% of the incoming class of 2024. This is statistically significant, and significant under enrollment. I further then looked at all the other universities that the Trump administration had identified, people like Columbia and Penn, the California state system, some of the schools out there, and a number of others, to see why they were being targeted. And this is what I discovered. And extra, read all about it. MAGA uncovers pattern of reverse discrimination in elite universities, a severe under-enrollment of white students. And this, in fact, statistically is the case. Some universities were even as low as 20% white. So, MAGA pro-white, looking for reverse discrimination, and it seems they found it. Trump is continuing his assault on elite universities and their admissions policies with this executive order ensuring transparency in higher education admissions from August 7th, 2025. In it, he refers to the Supreme Court decision which has definitively held that consideration of race in higher education admissions violates students' civil rights. He's complaining about a lack of data, which is the purpose of this order, is to have universities fork over this data because he wants greater transparency, which is essential to exposing unlawful practices and ultimately ridding society of shameful, dangerous racial hierarchies. Catch the irony. Now, this Supreme Court case was decided in 2023. A number of students had organized and sued Harvard, and at that time, it was decided, as I say, in 2023 in June. The media reported it as the Supreme Court ending affirmative action in college enrollment. There was actually a bit much more to that. It was pretty widely reported at the time. What I find interesting about this time with Trump in the Department of Education and Trump's executive orders and the Department of Education letter specifically referring to the Supreme Court case is that in my reading among the left liberal democratic political pundits and media commentators, there has been no mention of this Supreme Court case. But let's take a quick look at what it was about. It was heard in the October term of 2022, and it was brought by a number of students who formed, it seems to be a corporation, and they were incorporated, and they sued the president and fellows of Harvard College. Now, the University of North Carolina was also included in the suit, but it was mainly against Harvard. Right? And it was about their admissions policy. So it was decided in June of 2023. The Supreme Court, we're looking at the main question was whether the admission system used by Harvard College was lawful under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The justices set out this hard to argue against principle: eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. Quoting from earlier court cases, they mentioned that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment guaranteed that the law in the states shall be the same for the black as for the white, that all persons, whether colored or white, shall stand equal before the laws of the states. Again, how can you argue against that? They focused on Harvard's admissions process and stated that race is a determinative tip for a significant percentage of all admitted African American and Hispanic applicants. And after considering the evidence and establishing principles of how to decide the case, the Supreme Court held, again in a 6-3 decision, of course, with all the conservative judges voting for and the 3 liberal judges dissenting. But they held that Harvard's admissions programs violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The ruling was actually it was much more subtle and nuanced than I state here, that I've reproduced. It's a 237-page case, and much more nuanced than Trump presents. The main criteria, or the most important principle, is that they said race can be used as a factor in making admissions decisions. However, the important thing is it cannot be used negatively to eliminate students. And the Supreme Court decided that Harvard's admissions processes were insufficiently monitoring or set up to monitor, or having sufficient processes and directions on how to do that in order to avoid being used negatively. So the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that it was being used negatively. So, very important distinction. One of the more definitely surprising, startling conclusions I had to come to when I read the Supreme Court case against Harvard is that that was decided in 2023, and a year and 3 months later or so, the Harvard class of 2024 shows up, and it would seem that that class does not comply with the Supreme Court's decision that Harvard's admissions policies are in fact discriminatory, which led me to the conclusion, and the thought that I had to come to, is that is Harvard actually defying a Supreme Court ruling? I was looking, and I've been trying to pay attention to this issue, and I've actually yet to find something where Harvard has explicitly addressed this Supreme Court decision. Now, there was much made ado, and the Trump administration accused Harvard and many other universities of condoning, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel protests on their campuses at perhaps a risk to Jewish students, and they made a big deal about this anti-Semitic aspect to it. Don't listen to that. Look at what the Trump administration is writing. Look at the Supreme Court. It's all about the racial criteria used in college admissions. Trump and MAGA, as I say, they hate the East Coast liberal universities. They're just throwing everything as one does. You throw the kitchen sink at them. In fact, that anti-Semitic charge was really being more anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, as MAGA can be. If Trump was truly against anti-Semitism, he would have said something in 2017 about the anti-Semitic chants in the Charlottesville demonstration by those right-wing militia who were chanting, "The Jews shall not replace us," and other things. And Trump said they were fine people. Right? So it's not about the anti-Semitism. It's just about however they can attack the universities. But that still leaves us with the question, is Harvard defying a Supreme Court decision? So again, as reported, Trump is escalating a fight on how to measure merit in American education. This is it, how to go from what he's accusing of being an unlawful, discriminatory, race-based admissions system to one based purely on merit. Right? So they're looking at the ideological divides over merit, equal opportunity, and the legacy of racism. Right? The deep American story. The one side says, by considering race, this creates a diverse student body, and it's beneficial to everyone. This is an attack, and the accusation that this has led to discrimination against white and Asian students. The thing about Asian students I don't understand. As we saw, 37% of the Harvard freshman class were Asian American students, whereas Asian Americans represent only 6.4% of the American population. Where's the discrimination in that? Again, I believe that they lump the two together. They know what the statistics are. Right? They've been looking at this for years. They've been preparing this for years. They're trying to obfuscate. They're trying to create a bit of a smoke screen, a fog, a camouflage from their real purpose, which is focusing on the white students. Trump is demanding merit be the standard by which, and merit only, be the standard by which students are accepted by universities. And again, particularly targeting these elite institutions that seem to be under-enrolling white people. the question, so this brings us to the question posed at the beginning. So, what does MAGA mean by merit? And to try to explain this, and I think the only way I can explain this is I need to become MAGA. MAGA have generally some very angry people. So what I need to do and what I like to do and what I have to do is to kind of move myself into and slip into my MAGA rage brain. And here is my description, my depiction of my MAGA rage brain asking itself, what does MAGA really mean by merit? I'm going to use SAT scores to kind of give us a framework for analyzing and understanding this point. The SATs are, of course, the bane, the terror of high school students who are applying to college and sitting this exam. And it's a national exam. It's some exam that everyone takes, so it is an exam that can give us good comparability between student groups. The SAT has two parts to it, a verbal and a math, and that's split on the right side of the table, but we're not going to address that. But each part is worth 800 points, so the total maximum score for the SAT is 1,600. Harvard reports that for the freshman class of 2025, the average SAT was 1494, being a rather very impressive 93.4% of 1,600. And we'll bear this in mind as we look at the other statistics here. For all students, the average score is 1028, being 64% of 1,600. Looking at whites, they have an average score of 1082, being 68%. So they're generally performing above average. Not a huge amount, but above average. We look at the blacks. Black scores are near the bottom. It's the second lowest average score at 908, being 57%. I'm not going to go into the reasons why. There's probably a mountain of data and research, I'm sure, addressing this. Again, that's a different issue. We are looking at the SAT scores to help us provide a comparison of relative student performance and as a proxy for a general application to college. Then we have the Asian component. Average of 1219, being 76%. These are the star performers. They get the golden star. Understanding some of the numbers now, let's apply them and use the criteria. What would a MAGA meritorious system look like? What would the Harvard freshman class of 2024 have looked like had we applied MAGA's meritorious system? Still in my MAGA rage brain, and knowing that I have a Supreme Court decision 6-3, 2-1 conservatives, the liberals. We stomp the liberals, we own the liberals, right? And so we have this Supreme Court decision. What would that mean? This is where we make the link using our white Christian nationalist, white supremacist lens. What does merit mean? Well, as we saw from the scores, where the black average score is 908, the play that MAGA and Trump are making is that blacks, not many would get in. So maybe 1%, down from 14%. right? Could be higher. I don't know. I'm just an example. Hispanics or Latinos, few percent. Asian Americans, well, even though they're saying they're being discriminated against, Asian Americans are not being discriminated against at Harvard. No way. If we use as our measure the representation, the proportion of the general population, Asian Americans are killing it. So what we would want to see as MAGA is, kind of really put them back in line at 6.4%, exactly matching their percentage in the general population, meaning that whites would emerge with 90%. This is the sort of story, this is what MAGA and Trump are shooting for by insisting on merit. By insisting on merit, in the white supremacist view, you can knock out most of the black applicants. They won't get in. That's the point. By following through the Supreme Court decision, by forcing Harvard to do this, by achieving the Trump and MAGA objective, and then looking at MAGA's spirit of America, who are the true Americans, who are the real patriots, right? MAGA can then say, go Harvard, you're now the spirit of America. Let's look at what Harvard's freshman class of 2024 could have looked like if we were rigidly using a meritorious system for our admissions. Let's really go full on merit. As we've seen, blacks have an average score of 908. So they're going forward to Harvard. Remember, Harvard has an average SAT score of 1494. What chance if we do full merit, right? And then the whites come in, they have an average of 1082. So why would you accept a black if you can accept a white? But let's take it to, say, its logical conclusion. Here come the Asians with a 1219 average, outstripping the whites by a good margin. So why, on a meritorious system, why wouldn't you just accept only Asian Americans? Pure merit, no blacks, no Hispanics, no Native Americans. MAGA, no whites, 100% Asian Americans. So thank you, Supreme Court, and because of the Supreme Court, we can now say, go Harvard, the spirit of Asian America. Thank you for watching Pillar on Politics with me, Bob Pillar, and there shall be more coming. Please subscribe.